Hi, I'm Petra Lewis. For those of you who don't know me, I'm just helping Angelisa, who's the real moderator here, with some of the technical aspects that we'll go over with you in a minute for those who haven't been on the call before.
All right. So Petra, if you want to advance.
And what time are we? I would think we should start.
Yes. And so go ahead and please advance. All right. So the purpose of today's conversation is to bring the leaders of ABR and APDR together so that we can have a constructive and thoughtful conversation about the impact of COVID-19 and on our board takers and what that feels like from the ABR standpoint, what they're dealing with, as well as listening to them and then having them listen to us about the impact of the changes that are occurring. And I just want to frame this conversation because I know emotions are running high on many fronts. This has been a very stressful month, both for our country as a whole, with the George Floyd, with the racism. So we have a lot of things coming together that I think are stressing us out as individuals, as well as our work-life balance. And so I just want us all to reflect on the reason why we're here is to help one another and to maintain our professionalism. And the goal is to conclude with hearing one another and coming up with constructive ways of solutions. So that is the goal for today. I'm very proud to have Val Jackson, who's been the executive director of ABR from 2014 until, if you can believe, sadly, just this month is her last month as executive director. Many of you know Val. She was program director, Indiana, then chair at Indiana. So she has a viewpoint of multiple hats, and we're very grateful for her to be here today. Brent Wagner, we're also very grateful for him joining us. He was the president, past president of the Board of Governors for the ABR, and will be replacing Val in July. So thank you, Brent, for joining us as well. I'm also grateful that Vicki is here. Vicki Marks is the president of APDR and also is an IR person, so has a dual role in our conversations, so brings many perspectives. Okay, next. Petra.
So just to run over a little bit of the how to, if you haven't been on one of these calls before. So we have everybody muted by default, seeing as there's a lot of people on the call. We have some 121 participants. If you want to ask a question or contribute to the discussion, please raise your hand and I will ask you to, I will unmute you and I'll ask you to speak in the order that you put your names up. I'll give your name. If you have anything that you want to ask through the Q&A function or anything you just want to contribute to the general talk, please just submit it into the Q&A box. We will either answer these live or if they're repetitive, then I'll just get rid of them. If they're inappropriate, then we may not talk about them. Or we will just put them through to the general conversation. So keep an eye on that Q&A box because there will be stuff coming through. I see already, let me just move forward. We already have somebody holding their hand up, so let me just see who that was. No, I think that was just an accident. There's nobody there. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. Back to you, Angelisa.
She's muted.
There we go. We would appreciate when you are raising your hand and want to speak that you say your name and your institution. And since we have over 100 participants, we would appreciate you keeping succinct and so that everyone can participate. Okay. All right, I think we're ready. So we wanted to start, oh, did you want to explain this, Petra, just in case we might use the polling function?
So we do on some occasions in these sessions, we poll the audience and just get an idea of how many people agree or disagree with what we're talking about. And so that case, Angelisa will very clearly just ask a poll and just raise your hand, depending on the answer, and then I'll put everybody's hands down again afterwards. It's pretty straightforward.
Okay, so we're going to start with Val. So we asked Val to come and speak to the perspective of the ABR and what the last 6 months or 4 months have felt like from the ABR and their process. And so Val, please go ahead.
Well, first I want to thank Angelisa and Vicki, who gave this assignment to Ange, for the opportunity to talk with all of you. And we really are looking for input. And I know that it seems as though ABR has done stuff in isolation, but we really have been reaching out to stakeholders. It's just we never can reach everyone. So we've had a number of challenges with not just the diagnostic radiology core exam, but keep in mind that we actually have 4 specialties that the ABR has, and each one has somewhat different exam paradigms. And so DR is one of them, but it's a huge contingent, and we're obviously very concerned about this. So next slide, Petra, please. So one of the things is that you all know is that this has been really unpredictable in terms of the course of events that have occurred. And I personally I've never been through anything like this in my life, but also the rapidity of change is in my mind unprecedented. In that something seems to be true one day and sometimes it's an hour later that it's obviously that it's not true. And so the ABR has really been working tirelessly to come up with solutions to the issues that we see, trying to get input from various groups to make decisions, but it's been very difficult. As you all know, there are a lot of travel restrictions by institutions, limiting travel by faculty or by residents. And then there are also state restrictions on sizes of gatherings, and notably the state of Illinois, you can't have a gathering of more than 50 people for the foreseeable future, and which obviously it severely impacts our Chicago Exam Center. So the decisions that were made to postpone the exams, and they're not just diagnostic radiology exams, but all of our exams, has been made after repeated discussions by our Board of Governors, which is our policy-making group, and we really have tried to solicit input from a number of groups, including resident groups and program directors and people at AUR. The biggest problem as I see it is, again, this is such a moving target, and we have had very little turnaround time in terms of trying to make decisions. So the decisions to the people who were not involved in the meetings that we had appear to be just kind of coming out of nowhere. Now, we've had a lot of questions about why can't we give virtual exams, or why can't we hold our core exam at distributed test centers like Prometric or Pearson VUE. And then to compound this, there are several ABMS boards that have announced that they're going to be giving virtual exams or are piloting virtual exams. The thing that I would say about that is that the efforts that are required by the boards who are piloting, no one is doing this for a full group of candidates, but the pilots have been incredibly labor intensive, and they've encountered a number of significant technology problems, obviously things that we want to learn from. All the other ABMS boards do have relatively, simple's not quite the right word, but technologically not complex exams that they can give at Prometrics and Pearson VUE. And in fact, we give our radiation oncology and medical physics qualifying exams at Pearson VUE centers. The problem with the core exam is that it is such a complex exam with such high volume data sets that those exam centers cannot handle the exam. yeah, we like the fact that we can control monitors or we can control lighting, but the fact of the matter is, if we were going to try and even give on those things, they can't handle the computer power that's necessary. And we have been talking with Prometric and Pearson VUE since I arrived at the ABR. So at this point, that's not an option, but it is something that we continue to explore. We are actively working on virtual exams. We have a group of staff that are dedicated to this. I will say that every single day we've had meetings with our volunteer board members about this to try and see what we can come up with and to learn from the other ABMS boards. And again, I would just caution you that when people tell you that American Board of Surgery is doing this, they've had 2 pilots. One had 17 people, the other had 54 people, and they've got 2,000 people to examine this year. And listening to the description, it was very eye-opening. It's not impossible. There have to be a lot of compromises, but it is not flipping a switch. So we are actively working on this. At this point, we don't have a timeline. We would like to get something in place as soon as possible. And again, we're working on this so that hopefully we will have a timeline at some reasonable point. But I know what is reasonable to the candidates and to the program directors is not necessarily what we can accomplish. We also don't know exactly what the exams will look like. We're thinking out of the box, not just a matter of, well, we have to give the exam this way because this is what we've always done. It's what can we do to make the exam something that would be more amenable to a remote sort of situation. We do need to maintain the integrity of the certification process, which would include fairness, the validity, the reliability of the exams. And that's one of the things that we know that we may have to make compromises, but we can't let board certification be meaningless by just, putting it out there with no security at all. Next slide, please. And then next slide. And we really do welcome your ideas and your input. One of the things that has come up on numerous occasions that we really need your perspective about is, should we give these exams, have them given in the residency programs with proctoring by the program directors or program coordinators? And I know that years ago, that's how the written exams were done for diagnostic radiology, but those were the days where the exam booklets were shipped to a place and everybody could sit at a table and have a proctor in the front, and then they'd fill out their bubble sheet. It would all be sent back to the ABR. Today, we're dealing with much more complex issues. If we were to somehow get the exam electronically to you, would your facility even allow the data into your network? There are a lot of things that are just completely out of our control, but we really want to explore options with you guys about what we might be able to do. And at that point, both Brent and I are willing to take questions.
Brent, do you have some additional comments?
Yeah, if I could just add to some of the things Val said, and I think her summary was excellent. I just want to point out, we understand that although we sought input from various stakeholders, especially in the second half of March, when all of us were getting used to what we thought the pandemic was going to look like. And of course, we were all wrong because it looks like something completely different. But at that time, it was important to make sure that the delay from June to November made sense, that it rang true with representatives from APDR and APDIR especially. And we were comfortable with that after discussion, and there was a certain urgency to get the word out, but not necessarily what it was currently. And the reason this was different this time, and I would argue, I think we shortcut it a little bit in order to be expedient. And the reason for that was we were getting pressure from a variety of, several program directors. Val was getting letters, it seemed more than once a day actually, from people who are kind of saying, the reality is you're not going to be able to administer that test in Chicago in November. Just admit it and let the residents and the programs know that, So I think what we did was we traded off the need to be expedient and get that decision out for stakeholder input. The fact is, we were going to have to do that anyway, and that was, I think, Vince's letter and follow-up, which got into the why instead of our more concise, expedient communication earlier. So I think we could have done that better. I take responsibility for that. It was in the transition from my role as president to Vince's, but that's on me. And we should have been, I think, more clear to get the why out initially, because all it did was really, I think, upset people, and appropriately so. This is an emotional thing for your residents. I think it's certainly stressful for the program directors in a big way, and we understand that. I also want to add to what Val said about the exams. Now, we heard specifically about oral exams, which of course is not really relative to DR, it is relative to IRDR. And when we see that the American Board of Surgery, as Val said, has piloted this on a couple occasions and intends to make it work, and they've gotten fairly good reviews from their own candidates on the process. That is true, and we're taking that to heart. We're saying, hey, maybe this will work in a good way. We can do it sooner rather than later. But the fact is, it is a big lift. It is more complicated than it seems. And in fact, the boards we heard from last week were universally in agreement on the fact that this is a lot more complicated than our stakeholders believe. That would mean candidates and in our case, program directors. So I think it's important to kind of keep that in mind, that this is not, and I'm guilty of it too. I'll go to Val and the staff and I'll just say, let's do X and Y and Z and let's get it done in 60 days. And they come back with very reasonable, very cogent arguments as to why that can't be done without putting our candidates at risk, meaning that that the process, if it's not close to perfect in its reliability for execution, we have a problem. And of course, we've been compared to online meetings like the recent ASNR or ACR, the pending RSNA. Well, if they can do it, why can't you do it? And Val alluded to some of these things. Technically, it's just not the same thing to execute on a different mission, if you will, a different goal. And I want to float a question before we get into the discussion. And you know, this is going to be largely your time to ask us, you know, questions that we can clarify. But Vince Matthews, I want to convey, he was very sorry he couldn't join us tonight. He is the president as of June 1st of the ABR. He had a conflict at his institution he could not get out of. But he did have an idea that he wanted me to float, and I don't need a decision today. And in fact, I'm not even sure we could do it. But he raised an idea I thought was brilliant. And if you think it's brilliant, then I'll take credit for it. If you don't like it, then indeed it was Vince's idea. But he said, would it suit the programs and the residents to, rather than these changes and postponements that are incremental, would it be more suitable to just say, we're going to examine the group that would have been examined in June of this year in June of next year? And the hope would be that we would have a virtual platform in place. And if not, by that time, I think it's anticipated that the risk from COVID itself will have lessened. And that would be our goal. And we're putting it way out in the future so that people can plan around it. It's not optimal because there's some residents who would say, no, examine me earlier. Some programs would say, no, we want our residents to sit for that examination sooner. And the second piece of that would then be for the following class to plan for that. And this is all hypothetical, in say October of 21. And again, allowing advance notice so that you could plan for that. So just think about that. Let us know what you think about if that were doable at our end. Is that something that would work? The idea being at one or both of those that we would have a virtual option rather than our test center option. That is.
So perhaps we could just poll the audience and then about that question and then move on to questions, because I think there's probably quite a lot there. So Neil, I know that you've got your hand up to speak, so, and I won't forget about you, but could those who feel that having both the current thirds and the current, the upcoming fourths and the upcoming thirds take the exam at the same time in June, hopefully in a virtual format?
No, I'm sorry.
Did I get that right?
No, we would only be examining the group that would have been examined in June of in June of 20, we'd be examining them in June of 21. They'd be R4s. So right at the end of their residency.
And then the next group a year late?
They'd be about 4 months late. So there'd be a space there so that you wouldn't have two groups of residents testing at the same time. So that group would be tested, let's say, I'm just throwing out October, be tested 4 or 5 months late, but we'd be testing the group that would have been examined this week, really, a year late. But we'd be spacing out those two groups. We wouldn't try to test two groups at one time. I think that for most programs is insurmountable. I mean, I don't think that's practical.
Okay, so put up your hand, folks, if you like that idea.
And then next we're going to hear from Vicki.
I was just going to add that when the core exam was first implemented, I think it was in 2013, they had one class take it in June and then another class take it in September. I forget exactly. I think it was the R3s took it in June and the R4s took it in September, but there is a precedent for staggering classes when an unusual situation, the initial implementation of the exam occurred.
All right, so we have 28 out of 146 there who felt that idea was acceptable. Oh, got a few more coming in here. All coming out of my window.
Yeah, so Petra, just remind them to press the hand for the vote. Everyone press your hand if you want that.
All right. Folks who like that idea, we've got around 42, 43. So about a third of the people who are on, just under, like that idea.
Okay, so it's clearly a minority, and it's of course a difficult poll because I'm making it a binary thing, right? I'm saying it's that or something else, and the something else could come in a variety of flavors, and Val already alluded to that. So so I just wanted the sense of was that even a practical solution, and our goal again was to give as much lead time as possible so that change as much as we could would be mitigated.
All right, Neil, Madden, you've had your hand up for some time. I'm going to allow you to talk. You have to unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you.
We hear you.
So first of all, I just want to say thank you to the ABR. I know I reached out and I know other people reached out to you in March, and I appreciate your proactive nature. I know my residents, were already stressed during this time. So, I appreciate you trying to find some way of anticipating things. I know some of our medical students who were studying for step one basically were in a period of just active studying for months on end before they could even take it. So saving our residents that challenge, I think, was very helpful. So that being said, I do appreciate the challenges you have had and appreciate that while you sent out the initial letter, I do appreciate the follow-up letter. It would be, I think, helpful both in terms of the question you raised about staggering the exams and when to position it, to have a better understanding of whether or not what was stated in the letter, the February 2021 timeframe, would be doable for a virtual examination if it's not possible to do it live. And because that certainly, I think, influences people's thoughts about how to stagger it. I know the challenges I have right now is that it's going to be a pretty heavy lift to move, a number of call rotations and a number of other assignments if we were to shift from February 2021 to even June 2021. Because once we get in the midst of a curriculum and an academic year, it's very hard to organize that. So, what is actually needed to create this lift to plan for the future? What do you think the likelihood is that we're going to end up with a virtual board examination? And what is it that you think is doable? Because I think not knowing what is actually doable or not makes it hard to understand your thought process. And then the final piece that I guess I will just add is I think, having talked to many program directors, I think many programs are going to be more than willing to kind of create a heavy lift to be able to make sure that we can administer the exam. And I think it might be a worthwhile question to poll for the audience here. You know, how many people are willing to make that lift? But in order to do that, it may be helpful for you to describe what might be needed, at least in some broad sense, so that we actually can understand what it is that will be needed to be partners with you in potentially administering that exam.
Val, do you want me to comment first, and then you can correct me as you. To your first point, the reason we're not terribly optimistic about February as a virtual option, I don't think I ever conveyed that. I thought February, remember, was there was going to be November, sort of February, March, meaning that the November exam was the first one, and if people couldn't make it or chose to, they could elect to take the exam in February, late February, early March. That was a ballpark just to kind of say that there would be a second exam in this cycle, because that's what we had done in the past. So we didn't want to deviate from that too much. I think the idea of a virtual exam that's ready to go in February is probably not realistic. And I'm saying that because our IT people and even our own, for example, members of the board of trustees are saying we won't be able to accomplish that. And here's the reason. We're shaving 3 months off right away, because in order for us to examine in February in a new format, we would have to announce that in November, right? We'd have to give your candidates 3 months notice to do that. We'd have to give even more. I'm sure there are programs and pro directors and residents who would say that's not enough. And I think in order to do that, then we'd have to have a system that we had developed, piloted, and refined, and have all that ready to go by, say, mid-November. It's just not realistic. There are too many challenges and too many intricacies to that process. So although I think we're setting a very aggressive timeline for the next 12 months to try to get that done by June, I think to try to get it done by February, which again means November, would be a challenge and probably not realistic. We'd be misleading you, I think, if we really said that we could do that. Your second point about what would the programs be willing to do, and again, I'll let Val clarify and add to this, really is about our programs willing to do proctoring in their own facilities if we were able to deliver an exam electronically, possibly in increments, actually, possibly in 2 or 3 increments rather than 600 questions at one time. And our programs in general willing to do that. And I'm saying that because I've heard from program directors who say, yeah, everyone's going to be willing to do that. And I doubt it's everyone, but is it most people that would be willing to and have the facilities for delivering the exam on their own campus in order to basically proctor it, much as, you know, and I'm ancient, but when I took the boards, that's what the written board was, is you went to one center and there were, I don't know, 5 or 6 programs represented, and they were proctored locally for the writtens back in the early 90s. And Val, could you clarify or add?
Sure. So I think from our point of view, and we're actively looking into this, the biggest issues with having them in your institutions are, do you have facilities for it? Some people have said, well, they can use the PAX workstations. And if you're like we were at Indiana, you didn't have any spare PAX workstations except maybe in the middle of the night. Do you have a computer lab where you have a setup that the residents could use? Do they all have laptops they could bring to some place where you could, you know, proctor them? I have no doubt that you guys can find reliable proctors. That's not an issue. The biggest challenge, I think, will be all of the various network firewalls in your institutions. And things have tightened up so much now, even compared to when I left IU, that we have issues where some of our board members, their firewalls won't even let our emails into them. I always had a tendency to underestimate how strict the institutional policies were for IT. So it would probably, for many programs, involve having to go and coerce your institutional IT folks to be able to somehow let us in.
So Val, can I come up with just a couple of thoughts? Is
Sure.
Petra.
Yeah.
One is that if the exams are administered over a Saturday and Sunday, that we all have spare workstations on Saturdays and Sundays, and that, you know, say at my institution, a lecture room could have workstations moved in by IT for the period of the weekend, which would allow social distancing and everything else. And then a proctor could come from the medical school, or a paid proctor, somebody independent. Also, I know that the ACR has worked on, and I may get this a little bit wrong, but I've talked to them about it for RAD exam, where they basically send out a box, and the box is a contained network, so it doesn't get into like the rest of the hospital network that contains the exam. And the local computers that are hotspotted to that local network can access the exam. And I just wonder if that might be, I mean, I realize it would mean, you know, and this isn't something that's like 2 cubic foot. This is something that's like an external hard drive sort of thing.
Okay.
I
That's
just
good
wonder
for
if they're
me
worth
to know.
exploring.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
We have a whole bunch of questions in the Q&A box, and I wonder if we could get Angelisa to address some of them.
Right. So we want to alternate for those that want to speak, kind of our extroverts versus introverts. So we have introverts probably writing questions, and then those that want to speak are raising their hands. So the goal is to alternate between the two. So I'm going to start with Priscilla Slanitz. She has a question of why not create multiple dates for 50 people at a time to take the exam over the year. So I'm going to just give you, Val and Brent, some suggestions from very bright people. So that was a suggestion of, is it possible if we are going to, if a virtual does not become possible, have you thought about maybe just rotating the exam? So it's not just 1 or 2 dates. So not, I don't, go ahead.
So just clarify, rotating the exams to various facilities?
I believe Priscilla means that because the new rule set is you can't have more than 50 people in a room, another way of thinking of it, instead of just having 1 or 2 dates, is to use that that number of people over several dates.
Yes, and that's actually something we thought of. Here's the biggest issue, and that is that you basically throw away security, only because we don't have the resources to make 50 times, you know, however many. We don't have you'd have to make a different form. Like right now, we give the core exam 2 administrations per thing.
Yeah.
But otherwise, you'd have to have additional resources. And as much as we all know that the residents, they never share anything.
Right. I hear what you're saying. You would almost have to have 10 different exams because of the, okay, so that's a good point. Okay, so I'm just going to keep on going until Petra tells me it's time for a hand.
Well, Laurie Deet has had a hand up. You want to take her next?
Okay,
Laurie?
Yeah, let's go back and forth. Go ahead.
Laurie, you'll have to unmute yourself. There you go.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have a question about virtual exams, and specifically, I know a few years ago, mammography was given to DR residents as a virtual exam.
Yes.
And that happened, I think, in the course of a few months from when the core exam to when it was administered. And so my question, it could happen then, and I realize that this would be scaling it up, but if it could happen then, why can't it happen now? And why would it take a year to develop a virtual format? I think I'm hearing maybe that it would take at least a year to develop a virtual format. That's my question.
Well, let me address that breast issue. First of all, I want to remind everybody how the hysteria of residents, because we did have a glitch at the Chicago Center on one of the administrations, and the residents went crazy. And I don't blame them. I mean, it's a stressful thing. But we had to come up on a relatively quick notice with a way to administer that to the candidates who were already passing the core exam. But that it wouldn't cost them anything. It would be minimum time away from their program. They wouldn't have to travel. And so we did come up with this virtual concept. Now I will tell you, and I'm not happy about this, but it was what we had to do. We took the exam content that we had, and two of us went through and eliminated all of the questions where there might be a problem with seeing the findings on the image. So we watered the test down to do that. We also we didn't have any security. It wasn't proctored. It was on the honor system. We had the residents sign up. I want to say there might have been 10 per hour over numerous days. They all got the same form. Again, these were all people who were already passing the course. So they had a high likelihood of passing. Even with that, we had significant problems with internet connections during that time. But we had IT people on call the whole time that if somebody called in and said, I can't get in, it's my time, IT would work with them one-on-one for 10 people an hour. That is impossible to scale up for 1,200 people all at the same time. We have actually used the software that we developed for that. We're already using that now in our exam centers, and that would be probably the basis of what we want to do. But I think it's really important to know that in my mind would not be an acceptable certification process for the whole exam, if that makes sense.
Lori, do you have a response for that? Or thoughts?
Well, you know, I think another thought that I have is that I know it was brought up that the ACR is doing, you know, may have some other ideas and maybe broadening. So my thought is, it seems that this virtual exam should be solvable, and maybe broadening, getting more, you know, people involved with it, coming up with a solution. It just is hard to believe that it would take a year to arrive at a solution. That's kind of you know, hard to believe. But I mean, I hear what you're saying, but it just seems like if we engaged more people, there's a lot of smart people. I mean, you know, maybe could come up with a solution. Thank you.
Yeah, if I could add to that, I think you're right. It does seem that way, and the Board of Governors has looked at this, because we go into the room and we say, just get it done. And as I said earlier, you know, 3 to 4 months, let's get this going. And it doesn't take long before some very real concerns surface that really, you know, if we could do it, we would do it. I mean, it's that simple, and it's not for lack of sort of seeking out additional ideas or getting you know, the sense of, okay, what's being done from other boards or from non-medical examinations. But Val's point is correct that, you know, psychometrically, we were comfortable a couple of years ago deciding to do that for a small portion of the exam, because we had a very valid psychometric history that the individuals who were passing the test, which were the only ones who were qualified to take the breast portion anyway, were a valid comparator. And we felt good about saying that we've maintained a certificate that means something, and yet we bent the rules, you know, in the sense that we allowed the exam to be conducted as Val described. But we were comfortable with it. We said that was fine. I think, and I agree with you, it seems on the surface this should be doable. And no one's done it, though. No one's actually delivered an image-rich examination with huge data sets to a large number of people in a secure manner that allows for a fair, reliable exam for the candidates. We're not saying it can't be done. I think it can be done. I think it's something that can be accomplished. I just think it's optimistic to say that we can do that in 6 months or even 8 months.
So Brent and Val, a couple of people have written in asking, the format and image quality of the MOC OLA questions has been very successful. Could testing centers administer a virtual exam similar to that format? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, and I'll answer that first, and then again let Val comment. But that exam content, and many of you, I would think most of you on the call are participants in the OLA process, as am I. Those questions are really based on a true maintenance function, right? A continuous certification function. Am I keeping up with what's current? Am I, as I define my practice pattern, am I comfortable with that? And those questions are really basic, what we call walking around knowledge. Means I shouldn't have to study for this test. It shouldn't. It should be representative of what I do, and I'm not going to get them all right, and that's okay. And I learn from the ones that I don't get right. It really has a formative function, remember, a learning function, as well as a summative function, which is the assessment. For us to apply that too closely to initial certification, I think is in danger of lowering the bar to the point where their certificate would mean a lot less. And I certainly view those questions as not really a review. I mean, they should be, some of them should be quite challenging if you haven't seen that diagnosis in a while. But we're uncomfortable applying that. It was never intended to work like that. It was intended to be a formative and summative function, and it was intended to be sort of basic things rather than those important concepts that you would want your graduating resident to know before they are considered a practicing radiologist. And Val, can you add to that?
Well, I think the one thing to keep in mind is that we've learned a lot of lessons from OLA, and again, we're applying a lot of those things to what we're doing. But the OLA questions that were developed by committees and the images were selected specifically knowing that it wasn't going to necessarily be as good of a quality device for somebody to look at as it would be in an exam center on one of our monitors. And so, like, we can't just like take, well, first of all, we can't take the OLA stuff and now move it to initial certification because, again, there's, other than the honor system, we don't have security around that content. But we'd also, it takes a long time to develop the content to make a new exam that would have images that would be appropriate for that. Because keep in mind that people that do OLA, I mean, it looks great when I'm on my MacBook Pro. Right now I'm looking at a PC laptop that the screen is not very good. And I can tell a big difference in image quality or versus when I look at it on a tablet versus something else. And that's one of the things that a big variable that can be problematic for candidates that don't realize what they can't see if their environment is not controlled. We may be willing to give up that control of their environment, but again, we have to be sure that the images have a reasonable chance of being appropriately diagnosable for people.
Sure. I think that's what Matthew meant. He wrote back, it's not, he didn't want to take the content from the OLA, to be clear, but just the image quality and the question format. That might be another thing for ABR to explore.
Yeah, and we are.
Or we can use PACS monitors, which I don't think anyone's going to argue that there aren't enough high quality resolution monitors in the radiology department.
Do you have hands up?
I don't have hands up. There's a lot of questions on the.
I'm going to keep on going. So why not identify a few more regional centers, such as for each geographic region, such as the ACR education, Tucson, Chicago, offer more so that people don't have to fly and have so that's another option to consider. Yeah. And that's, instead of just Chicago and Tucson, start to recruit similar to what I was speaking earlier in the old days with the written, in which we went to, you'd have five different programs in one center taking an exam.
And again, that's something that is definitely on the table, particularly for larger metropolitan areas that have several programs within driving distance. That definitely is something that we'd be interested in.
Okay, a couple of people are still not quite, they're not clear as to why the person of view, those centers that others use cannot be used by ABR. Is it possible to make the image-rich quality of our exam less so that they can handle it? Is it this, or is there a way to, since we are in incredible times, to make the exam compatible with those testing centers is the question.
Well, and I think that's a great question, and it is one of the things that we're going to be looking at. It would require a huge change in the format of our DR exams, though. When for the radiation oncology and the physics exams are much more the kind of standardized tests that you think of, that they're mostly text, there's some diagrams, there's some pretty low resolution images, but they're also smaller exams because they actually have more numerous exams before they get to their oral. Our core exam is really complicated, and it's not just the images, it's also, however, I'm not a technical person to be able to explain why the way the exam is put together is more complicated than these testing centers have any desire to handle. And again, we have been trying to coerce them for years, because we would like nothing better than to not be in the testing center business. But they don't want to. We're not a big enough part of their business to make it worth their while. You know, we would have to bend to what they want, and that may be what we do. The other thing to keep in mind is they're closed, and we've been putting off RO and MP exams because we don't know. I mean, they're closed. We don't know when they'll open, and they have they're going to have a whole lot of backlog. And even ABMS has gone to them trying to plead for the whole board's community with very little success, because we're not a priority for them.
So this is another great question. I think it's a great idea. Rakesh said, RSNA is canceled for the coming year. Is there a way to leverage access into McCormick Place and the IT infrastructure of RSNA to administer the test in numerous rooms that exists there? That would allow for isolating people in groups of 50 and keep the November timeline intact.
I love that idea, and I'd be happy to talk to RSNA about it, but I don't think that it's their call on McCormick. I think the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois won't allow that number of people into McCormick Place. But I'll be happy to talk to Mark Watson at RSNA about it.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think part of the concern would be the reproducibility of the environment. And I don't know if people are aware, you know, the Tucson and Chicago test centers are so closely aligned in terms of the construct. I mean, the size of the cubicles, the height of the walls between them, the ambient lighting, it's all standardized so that a candidate could take the test in either location and not suffer from, you know, we do get complaints about image quality. They're not often, but we do get them. And we also get, Val didn't mention, when we talk about Pearson View and our other exams for radiation oncology and medical physics, there are glitches there. They're far from perfect, and those exams are for a few hundred people, not 1,200. So those are kind of things I would consider if we were going to use something like McCormick. It's big enough, and I suppose, like the question implies, if we could separate into groups of 50 and have, I mean, it would be 24 groups of 50 spread throughout McCormick. Not impossible, but is it possible that we would struggle to reproduce the testing environment in each of those 50 or each of those 24 locations to the point of doing it? And I'm sorry, I'm overstating that because we still have the Tucson site examining a minority of the candidates as well.
Yeah.
But a great idea. We should
would this be, you know, I think maybe we have to always bear in mind with this that, you know, perfect is the enemy of done here. And that I suspect that all these extremely anxious residents may be willing to accept a little variation in atmosphere in order to be able to get their exam done.
Well, Petra, I'm glad you brought
we do have,
and that's entirely true until they fail. And then the tolerance for that variability plunges to zero. And we have, you know, years of experience with this. No one has ever failed and said it was because I was not prepared or not knowledgeable enough to take the test. You know them. Yeah. You work with the residents.
Yeah,
right?
no, I know. You're right.
So we can't function at 95% success, and because every candidate who fails is going to say, "Hey, you guys didn't design it well enough."
We have a Maltri Patel. Let me allow you to talk. She has a question here.
Hey Petra, it's Maitre. Can you hear me?
Oh, hi, Mitri.
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
As a long time, thanks for doing this. As a long time ABR volunteer, obviously I've been involved in writing questions and in trying to understand how we can best assess people. Having said that, I think one of the things we have to grapple with is the notion that this test is a particularly good test, and that's a long-term question. But in the short term, recognizing that there's now a lot of data, including a number of collaborative work that we've done on some of the APDR committees, that the test really is a good function of understanding how well people can take tests and learn and study for tests. I think the ABR may be misestimating how important some of the things they think are really important are for this test in distinguishing between the candidates. Any test, I think, will do almost the same job in terms of stratifying your candidates into, who's passing and who's not passing, because as Lincoln Berlin has shown and a number of others, this test is not particularly special.
Yeah, actually, I'll comment first, and again, invite Val to comment as well. We acknowledge, I don't think there is a perfect testing instrument. I've never found one or seen one or read about one. The test is, you're right, it's divided, you look at two different things. Is it testing competence or ability versus performance? And performance, of course, gets into the ability to, how well do you take a test? And we saw that, and of course, there's been some recent discussion around the oral exam. If you were good at taking an oral exam, you would pass the test even if your knowledge base wasn't sound. And I'm not saying that that was universal. I think most of the people who passed the oral exam, in fact, had a good knowledge base and were good at taking the test. The same we hope is true with the exam as we give it. And there are constraints. There are limits to the exam. In a perfect world, the psychometricians would say more data. They would say more analytical pieces, more ways to test thought process, judgment, the kinds of things we want in our colleagues and we want in our residents. We hope that the programs are actually doing that they're measuring those things. This test is really designed to attest to knowledge as an indicator of competence. It's an imperfect indicator, and the test is an imperfect instrument. We accept all that. We are looking at ways to improve the test. Just last week, I sent out a communication regarding expanding it so the differential diagnosis would be tested more in a more fluid way, in a less disruptive way for the candidates. Again, getting at that idea that are we testing knowledge and sort of competence as opposed to performance. But that's the, right now when you give the multiple constraints, from a practical standpoint, what kind of exam can we give? And I apologize, that was a long-winded answer and we're getting short on time. But Val, can you add to that? Did I say that correctly?
I thought you said that very well. And I would keep in mind that there is a lot of controversy about exams in general, all forms of exams, and lots of changes being made. And it's certainly something that the ABR will study in the long term. I don't think that there are any, I think that there are a lot of gray areas in all this, but we're trying to find a solution for the problem at hand. And I think what you're talking about is something definitely where we always examine, but we'll keep looking at in the future.
So, okay, I'm going to keep moving since there's some great questions. So Val, some people have heard that Arizona Center could still be used. Why not use it as a center in November? Because the residents want to take the exam. Is there?
Well, yeah, the Arizona Center can be used. Here's the problem. Well, first of all, Arizona is now the reddest, and I don't mean politically, the reddest state. We have the highest COVID growth rate right now. We're just lagging behind. We do have control. We could space things out and do social distancing, and we could do that. I'll tell you, the biggest problem that we've got is that the residents would complain that they would have to travel. And it's not really feasible for somebody to drive from Boston to Arizona. I mean, if it's something we could certainly look into, we would definitely need to come up with more forms of the exam. But or if it was just a smaller subset of people, that wanted to take it, that's something that's certainly on the table.
Yeah, I think more program directors are writing in that they would like to see regional centers, and Arizona could be one of them.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna just keep on moving on because they're, ABR, please clarify, will there be an exam in February? As alluded to the letter from last week, or will there not be an exam at this time? This is a very critical decision point for PDs planning schedules for next year. Even if you don't have a date yet, just that information would be very helpful.
So I wish I had a crystal ball. I really do. I mean, I would like nothing better than to be able to tell you guys. That's, I think, where the suggestion that Brent presented earlier about, and this is something for you guys to think about, would it be easier to just say, okay, we're going to take February off the table? Because there are a lot of unknowns.
Yeah.
You know, the unknowns of the pandemic, the unknowns of whether we could get a virtual exam done by then. I mean, I would love to see that happen, but again, this, you know, it's
Right.
just really hard to predict.
So Val, I think that for an action item from this, I think it would be nice to have a survey come out from the ABR to the APDR membership.
Okay.
Asking, we would.
And APDIR.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Vicki.
Are there APDIR people on this call?
They were
There are.
invited.
They were
Okay.
invited.
Okay.
So I think that would be something that you should hear.
Yeah.
People, because just speaking by myself, it sounds like if you would be able to guarantee a test in June, you're not saying what that test would be, but at least we would have a date in mind that would be, unless we have another disaster. But that would be the intent, so that people could make their schedules for next June and next September, which I heard from many program directors talking over the week that had been floated around and it seemed quite positive. So I was a little surprised at the vote earlier, but I think that might be really helpful to post that out there, because to people's point, the timing of the exam is important as where it's delivered.
I'd like to chime in and support
Yes.
the idea of having a timeline that's long enough to
Be realistic.
be realistic and to the extent possible in the middle of the pandemic, guarantee that something's going to happen on that schedule. Because I think a huge amount, and this is not news to anybody, but a huge amount of resident and program director angst about this whole situation is not having a end date that they can plan their lives around. And wearing my IR hat, the whole issue of getting the ESIR in is a big piece of that anxiety too. Thank you.
Can I ask if people are willing to stay on another 15 minutes, providing the software doesn't turn itself off? I'm not sure about that, because we have a lot of questions.
I can say as long as you want.
Yeah, me too.
Because, I think we should keep going if that's okay with you.
So people are welcome to step off, because we know a lot of people have time constraints, but we'll continue going since Val and Brent are able to stay. Okay, so here we go. So is it guaranteed that we're doing a virtual exam? So people are kind of trying to lock down, like, is that in your, Val and Brent, is that the direction that ABR is going at this time, is to develop it virtually?
I think it's reasonable to say that we will get to a virtual exam at some point. I think to say that that's definitely going to be in June is me over promising. I wish we could. You know, an awful lot of suggestions we've heard in the last 45 minutes. I'd like to do any of them. I think if they work, I think they're terrific. You know, McCormick or do it like MOC. I think we just run up against constraints. But this question specifically, the Board of Governors is very deeply supportive of moving toward a virtual exam. There are two caveats. One is, I don't know when, and you've already heard us talk about that uncertainty. We don't want to say we can do it in 6 months and not be able to deliver. I really don't think that's practical. And on the other hand, I don't know what exactly it's going to look like. We may find that in order to do a virtual exam, the test is going to look different. That doesn't mean it'll be any worse than the test we have now. It just means that it's going to be different. And And we have to work through some of those questions as well. So yes, fundamentally, philosophically, the ABR wants to go to a virtual exam or distributed in some way. So it might not be, again, sitting in your living room taking the test on an iPad, but some form of distributed exam so that travel to our test centers is minimized. And I can say that with confidence. We discussed this as recently as a few weeks ago and just said, COVID or not, this is probably something that we should do if we could do. The reason we hadn't done it in the past, it requires concessions or trade-offs on numerous constraints that you wouldn't like, we wouldn't like, because if you and I would like them, we would have done them already. We have no particular reason to maintain test centers. So
Okay.
So I hope that's specific enough.
No, yeah, I understand. I think Val and Brent, people are writing in that a lot of people don't know how to raise the hand feature. So you're putting out your own poll through email to the APDR about having June and October is a preferred method. Does that make sense? So there's people writing in to say that they didn't know how to vote when we started.
Yeah, I was wondering that too. And much like you said, your conversation was sort of contrary to what you were seeing in your recent conversation.
That's right. So I think that this poll might have been a reflection of people getting used to the Zoom raise your hand and may not be reflective of the true vote. And so I would encourage you to, because that might be something very productive that comes out of this, that program directors would have a secure date and then would be waiting to hear from you whether it would be an in-person or a virtual exam that you'd know by June by that point is what I'm seeing from the comments.
Well, sorry, let me just add on to, I didn't finish the last half of your last question. That is that in June, we believe we can offer an exam. We would hope it's a virtual exam, but if not, it would just be the conventional testing center one. But at least it's far enough in the future that you can plan around it.
So Karen Johnson's been very patient here. Karen, you have to just unmute yourself to talk.
Okay, I think I unmuted.
Yes.
So I feel like now I'm being redundant. When I first raised my hand, it probably wasn't, but speaking on behalf of my residents, I think the most important thing at this point is to just set a date and move forward. The constant flux and the changes for them, as well as obviously for us and the schedule, is what is exhausting, and nobody can plan for it. So it sounds like the earliest anyone can expect a virtual exam is in June. And it seems like nobody's going to be able to travel and put a bunch of people in one room at one time anytime soon. So I think just a decision is what we are very hungry for. There's lots of ideas obviously being floated, but if those ideas are known to not be possible, a decision is what my residents are. A date is what we want more than anything. Thank you. And thank you for organizing this. I really appreciate it.
So I'm getting a lot of pleas. Everyone's saying, 4 or 5 people just jumped on saying, yes, totally agree. This is where our stress is coming from, Val and Brent, is we need a date that can be depended on so that we can have, yes. So everyone's saying, yes, totally agree.
Okay, this is really, really helpful for us.
Yeah.
And I don't want, when we say we don't have a timeline, I don't want you to think that it's because, we're kind of sitting around eating bonbons here in Tucson, doing nothing since we're working from home. It's, we really have been working on this, and we will continue to fast track it. And because it's that important to us, and we know it's important to you.
Okay, a question. What would be the plan if the residents failed right before graduation, if it is in the June of their R4 year?
It's interesting. I just saw that it was typed in there right before you said that. That's kind of like when I took my test, which was in June of my 4th year. And if you failed, you came back and took it the next time. So I don't know. That part is kind of back to the future. That's kind of the way we used to do things in the past.
Well, keep in mind that since they just have to pass the core exam at some point before they would be eligible to take the certifying, which wouldn't be until 15 months after they finish they graduate. So they would actually, and we're planning to be able to administer it twice a year again. So they would, if they fail it in June, they would still have 2 more times to take it and pass it before they would take their certifying exam in October of that 15 months later. And
yeah, I'm sorry. I try to move from because I have kids and dogs like many of us at home. So I wanted to bring this up because I think this is another thoughtful idea. Has the ABR considered engaging with other radiology societies, including their informatics departments, to help you solve these logistic issues? So since, again, this is an incredible time, wouldn't this be a great way to see societies come together to help the ABR solve this problem?
That would be great. We're already reaching out. We have good relationships with the IT departments of the other ABMS boards. And so we've been reaching out to them, but I love Petra's idea of working with ACR on whatever they're doing with their box. But if anybody knows that they've got that, and I will also reach out to Mark Watson from RSNA because they've got a really robust IT setup as well.
So I liked that. That came from. Let's see, I'm just moving. I was trying to group these questions together. I think the concern about not being able to retake the exam relates to being able to be employed as a board eligible radiologist. Without the core exam, would that affect their employment status? Because are they still board eligible if they haven't passed?
They are board eligible when they graduate. They just
Perfect.
have 6 years of being board eligible to pass both the core and the certifying exam. So that it would not affect that.
That's great. Okay. So I've had several, so I'm grouping these together. I had 3 people write in. Has there been consideration given to move the exam to the R4 year permanently? Those on the ESIR track could then do multiple IR rotations in the 2nd and 3rd year. I think a lot of the program, yeah.
I think that's something that the board will discuss. I know that's come up at other points in time, and I think that will fall on Brent's shoulders to shepherd that.
My understanding, and this was right before I joined the board 9 years ago, but the plan for the exam after the orals, meaning this new paradigm, was designed right as I joined the board, right before I joined the board. And my understanding was that timing of the exam was at the request of program directors more than the ABR. So it's an interesting question. And if we were to look at changing it, I think we'd have to come back. Maybe lessons have been learned in the last 10 years that, or nearly that kind of say, well, maybe that's not the best timing. But that prescription, if you will, my understanding was that was sort of pushed or desired and requested by APDR less than it was by.
Very thoughtful question that we should probably revisit because of the compounding fellowship interviews that happen at the same time. The timing of the core exam has been difficult at times. And because I'm very action oriented. So Val and Brent, where would you suggest the forum is to have those types of conversations? That's not the specific issue for today, but where would those types of conversations of where the board should take place occur? Is that between the ABR and the APDR and APDIR executive teams, or that's something we should think about? Where can APDR members come up with these questions and have them heard and dealt with? There is a misperception, or there is a perception that the ABR, I think it's fair to say, some people believe it's not as approachable with these types. And so I'm trying to help bridge that. And how can we open up so that the ABR works and teams better with the APDR, that improves that perception?
Okay, well, I'll start and Brent can correct me. I think more forums like this would be really helpful.
Okay.
And I say that with the remembering that everybody is really busy and we all have an awful lot going on. You guys in particular more than me, because you got clinical stuff and resident rotations. But I think being able to have a dialogue like this is really important. And traditionally we have had a meeting with APDR leadership once a year at the AUR meeting. I don't think that that's often enough going forward. And even then, that's such a busy meeting that not everybody in the leadership team can be there.
Right.
But I just want to say that if anybody has questions or concerns, I would welcome that they contact me. I had my email address up at the ABR until they take away my ABR email on July 15th. But we really do want to have a dialogue, and I think that this has been really valuable from my point of view today, and I appreciate everybody's time and input.
It
Great.
sounds to me, Vicki, that this should be something that APDR sets up on a quarterly basis.
Quarterly, that's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Then, and the other reason why I like it is it's not just the executive boards, it's all
Yeah.
members of APDR can speak up, which it's hard as an executive team to represent all members. And if other members have a better idea, I think that's wonderful. So I think it would be great to hold these. Okay.
So Gretchen has been a patient
Okay,
with her hand up. So Gretchen, if you unmute, you can talk.
Somebody has brought up what I was going to bring up long before, so we're good.
Okay, I'll lower your hand then.
Okay. All right. I think we're closing in. I think we have all the questions. We've talked about practicals. Yeah. I don't see anything else. Petra, do you? I'm scanning all these.
I'm just having a quick scan of the questions. There are people saying, when are we going to know again? So I think that we've answered that, and a survey will help us that. Judah is asking, ABR, please clarify, will there be exam in February as alluded to in the letter from last week? But I think
I already answered. I already asked that question.
Yeah, we'll just get rid of these.
So I think we've done it. Yay.
There's one good question here at the end. Can we summarize the action items from today's meeting?
Yes. So I propose an action item as that Val or Brent will send out a poll regarding the question of the timing and the importance of that, because what we did see from this session is that's very important for program directors and residents to have a goal as to when the test will be. Another action item is to set up quarterly discussion boards such as this between APDR, APDIR, and ABR to keep this fellowship going, which I really appreciate. Vicki or Petra or Val or Brent, did you hear another? And then we had suggestions that Val was taking notes on. I saw, we had some regional, they'll look into regional centers so that people can travel. They'll look into having other societies help them with their IT issues. I think some really good ideas came out. Is McCormick Place another possibility? Did I cover the big ones?
Yeah.
Anybody else add to that?
Val, do you have an idea when you might be able to get a poll out to APDR and APDIR members?
I'll tell you what I would like to do, because I would like to send that. I'll send it to Stephanie tomorrow, and if then she can put it into a Survey Monkey or something, because we don't have your mailing list for everybody.
It needs to go to Stephanie and then Joy Gornal at SIR.
Joy.
And I guess I would ask, other than the question about June, are there other questions that would be helpful to ask in that forum? Other possibilities in terms of, would they prefer virtual and in place? And
Yeah, I think,
we could get some useful feedback from them.
you know,
Oh,
I
no,
think
I've
that's
got
it.
another one.
Well, that's
I
a
would
good point, because we are likely going to have several questions, and we're meeting for 2 hours tomorrow evening, 2 hours the following evening, and for about 5 hours next Friday. And that doesn't include sporadic sort of smaller meetings in between. I would rather than have you watch your inboxes for that poll question in the next 48, 72 hours, look for one in the last week of June, because I'd like to take this back to the Board of Governors and say, hey, here we have an audience, because I don't want to hit you with multiple requests for.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And what we might do, quite honestly, is get back to the executive committee of the APDR and have them at least look at the questions that were, just to make sure they're understandable, that we didn't phrase the question wrong in a way that is not going to give us useful information. Because we might make that mistake, and I'd rather catch that before it goes out to, 175 or 200 program directors. Does that make sense, Val? I mean,
That's fine. If you think.
I think we're going to know a lot more.
Oh, I do.
A
I
week
think
from Friday.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think after you have those meetings, that would be great. And then the other thing I would add is to the survey, because nobody likes a lot of surveys, is please have a box that says, what topic would you like for the ABR and the APDR and APDR discussion to talk about during these roundtable discussions?
Okay.
So for instance, it looks like the timing of the R4 year, the timing of the core exam is something that we should revisit. That seems to be important to people. And that would be a way of soliciting, are there other topics that you feel are important to talk about between program directors and the ABR? And that could help set the agenda for these conversations moving forward.
And I'm sure APDR would be very happy to collaborate on getting that survey together.
Yeah,
that's great. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Thank you very much, Val and Brent. I thought that was outstanding.
Thank you.
We really
Thank
appreciate the input. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Angelisa, for leading it, and for Petra for getting the technical stuff all done and moderating.
I'm very grateful to Petra.
And I'm trying to work out how I'll be able to save all the Q&A so we can put them up. I'll need Stephanie's help with that tomorrow.
Yep. Oh, and then one more thing, people, this will be a Zoom or a YouTube. So if people missed it or want to revisit it, it will be a lot on the APDR website. All right. Bye, everybody. Cheers.
Bye. Thank you, Val and Brent.
Thank you very much, Val and Brent.
Thank you.
Thank you.